Good evening, everyone. I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to Monday night. I'll remind you that it's what's today's date? April 28th, I guess. Is that the date? That is the date. The General Service Conference is currently going on in New York. I would ask you to send all prayers and great wishes to all members of the conference to have a great week. And a little heads up, do not hunt your delegate down like this Saturday to find out what happened. Like, they're probably going to get very little sleep this week. They're probably going to be talked out. The information will be transmitted, I am sure, quickly in some areas. But just wanted to let you know that. So tonight, first of all, I think it was just put in the chat. The Google link is there. If you're not in the private Facebook group and you need to get recordings of Monday night, they are all there. Tonight on the schedule, if I am correct, is a member's eye view. It is the last Monday night of the month. So we take a break from all the crossing the I's and semicolons and paragraphs and subsections of the conference charter and concepts and everything else, and talked about good old recovery, or a piece of literature that maybe comes from the service structure that has to do with recovery. Tonight, we're talking about one of my favorites, which is a member's eye view. Hopefully, if you don't have it, you can go to aa.org. You can even go to Google. The search engine optimization is excellent. If you just put in AA member's eye view, it's the first thing that comes up. You can click on it, and then you can read that. And it actually says, if you would like a PDF, you can click right here and you can download that PDF. A member's eye view, written by Alec Mick. I will not use his last name. I do not know any members of his family. Give me permission to break his anonymity, even though he is deceased. He was a member of the Brentwood Beginners Group. If you didn't know that, that's a group in Los Angeles, California, in the Brentwood section. And as the pamphlet says, it starts off right on the opening page and says, this pamphlet is designed to explain to people in the helping profession how AA works. Though the AA program relies upon the sharing of experience, strength, and hope among alcoholics, the recovery process itself is highly individual, adapted by each member to meet his or her needs. Therefore, the program is described here as it appears to one member. But the pamphlet does reflect fellowship thinking since it has been approved by the AA General Service Conference. The author of this paper delivered it first before a class on alcoholism counseling at one of our large universities. AA World Services, Inc. wishes to thank him for his generous permission to reprint and distribute this talk. So this was something presented at a university to people who are going to be working with alcoholics. And what he says there, which I love, that the AA program relies upon sharing of experience, strength, and hope. We're a storytelling organization. We have a textbook, but at our heart, we're a storytelling organization. And it says the recovery process itself is highly individual. So a respect that not everybody does it the same way, which I love. And then it says adapted by each member to meet his or her needs. So he's quite open-minded. This pamphlet, probably the problem with it, though, is it says it's designed to explain to people in the helping professions how AA works. Well, it's really easy to tell your story and to share your experience, strength, and hope. But it's difficult to explain what really is the secret sauce. Like, what makes AA work? That could be a million different answers from every different kind of person in AA in the world. One of the things, though, is that we know how AA does not work. And we have to remember it's 2025. It is not 1935 when AA started. It's not 1925, 10 years before AA when the Oxford group was going strong. It's not even 1970, 1980, 1990. It's 2025. So what's in this pamphlet is just AA. There's a lot of things in the modern world that are not in there on purpose. We don't have anything about medicine or science or other ways to get sober. We don't keep track of metrics. People in 2025, I just got off a conference call for a board that I'm on, and we were talking about strategic planning, and everybody wants measurable goals and metrics because that's so 2025, right? Everybody wants measurable goals and metrics. We don't do that in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't keep membership records. We don't do scientific studies. We do a survey, a PI survey, a membership survey, but we don't do any statistics. And sometimes that's hard for the modern world to understand that. So I'm just going to go through the pamphlet and just point out some things that I really love. But if you have not read this pamphlet, I hope that you do, because I think it's one of our best. I think it's so good because even it probably gets some people in AA mad, which is good. He's not some kind of zealot. He says in the opening paragraph on page 7, tonight I have been asked to talk about that therapy, and the difference becomes immediately apparent. He's calling AA a therapy. Some people would go crazy hearing that, right? He's just saying, in his language at the time. And he says, it seems to me I should try to be as objective as possible. And this seemed to me to call for advanced thought and preparation. How objective a member can be about an organization which he feels has helped save his life and his insanity is a moot question, but I can try. In other words, for people like us whose our lives have been saved by AA, we're not the most objective people to ask. And the other thing you got to remember is think about doctors and scientists and social workers and all kinds of people in the first 20 years of AA, 1935 to 1955. Especially the people Dr. Silkworth's age, who lived half of their professional life with no AA and the other half of their professional life with AA. At that time in the world, the smartest people in the world, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, clergy people, they were just happy that something came along that worked for alcoholics. Remember, up until this time, people like you and I are society's throwaways. And I think we forget that because, and I'm not talking about the outside issue, why it happened doesn't matter. But listen, I grew up in a town with one of the largest state psychiatric facilities in the world. I grew up in Kings Park, Long Island, home of the Kings Park Psychiatric Center, hundreds of acres with I don't know, 80 buildings. When my parents moved there in 1967, there were 25,000 inpatients, 25,000 people locked away. And not too far from where I grew up was Pilgrim State Psychiatric Center, Central Islip Psychiatric Center. Of course, you read in our history about Tom the fireman at Rockland County Psychiatric Center. So it's important to know that at this time, like in the early days of AA, all the way up until the mid 80s, when state psychiatric centers were closed, most of them, 95% of them across the world, across the country, like, I know why we have a lot of homeless alcoholics, because we have a lot of alcoholics who are homeless. But there used to be another option that society had for people like you and I. They sent us to a place like Kings Park, and they locked us up for an indefinite period of time. Not even a jail sentence, just you are locked up. You are a ward of the state, and you get put on some kind of wet brain or alcoholic unit where you're shot up with Thorazine every day and you barely survive, right? Like, that's who we are. Like, I know a lot of yous look good tonight. It's great. It's awesome. But that's who we are. We are society's throwaways. We're talking about a time when they were still doing lobotomies on alcoholics, like cutting out a piece or dissecting their brain, cutting a piece of it from attaching it to another. We're talking about a period of time when a woman alcoholic who wanted to be released would have to be agreed, she'd have to agree to have surgery that she could no longer have children. Like, we're talking about barbaric, archaic times. And that was the only solution for people that society had for us to keep us away from the rest of the world. So when you think about the psychiatrists and the clergy and the scientists and the doctors and the psychologists who had all been trying to help alcoholics, and the only real help was put them in a state psychiatric center and medicate them, so all of a sudden an organization appears that is taking alcoholics and, as the big book says, giving them a rebirth, resurrecting them to a new life. Professionals back then couldn't do, they shouted from the rooftops how great AA was. Today, I'm not saying there aren't professionals that love AA, because there are. But we also live in like a super judgmental world. And if something isn't based on science, people want to throw rocks at it. So, this pamphlet just talks about who we are. And I love this line. My task tonight is more difficult than it would first appear, because, as those of you who are members of AA already know, there is no official interpretation. That drives people crazy too. I sometimes think that drives people in AA more crazy than people outside AA. But there's no official interpretation. There's no party line, no official body of dogma or doctrine to which the members subscribe, no creed we recite. Even if the surviving co-founder of AA himself were standing before you tonight, he would tell you only how it all appears to him. I personally consider this, I love this line. I personally consider this absence of orthodoxy one of AA's strongest and most therapeutic principles. And I hope to cover this in more detail later. The fact remains that whatever I say tonight is and must remain a total personal statement. In fact, what I am about to say might be very well titled A Member's Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where it gets its name. He was just saying this is his view. If you go on to page 8, it says, "Why have I been asked to say it? I think you already know, since one of AA's strongest traditions is that our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. I'm not here to try to sell it to you, whether you are a future counselor or a present alcoholic. AA's track record as compared with other methods of recovery from alcoholism speaks for itself, and I am sure you have long since been apprised of that record in this classroom." And then it goes at the bottom of page 8 to say this: "Let's see if we can do better in AA's basic textbook, the volume Alcoholics Anonymous, first published in 1939 and written by Bill W. with the help and advice of the first 100 alcoholics who were able to achieve a year of sobriety. In chapter 5, entitled How It Works, we find these words. Oh, I love that they say this because it reminds me of like how arrogant I am. Our description, because you've heard this a million times, the end of How It Works, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that no human power could ever relieve our alcoholism. C, that good God could and would if he was sought. I mean, it used to drive me crazy because my brain thinks a certain way and works a certain way. It says there are 3 pertinent ideas and then says ABC. Like, why not 1, 2, 3? There are 3 pertinent ideas, 1, 2, 3. But I've been in AA quite a while. Doesn't seem like anyone else cares that it's ABC. Seems that that's just the way my mind works. And then it says these so-called ideas, while more specific, are certainly not unique to Alcoholics Anonymous. Man has been beaten to his knees in an admission of personal helplessness since time began. Likewise, since time began, he has turned to the idea of a supernatural being who would deliver from him his fate if he performed certain rituals and observed certain rules. There is obviously no new or different fact here, yet the 3 ideas we have heard are the very cornerstone of AA's philosophy. So we can turn now in our effort to isolate AA's uniqueness. What makes us different? And then it says, the first sentence of the first definition I read to you contains the only is statement I have ever been able to find in all of AA's literature. Let's listen to it again. AA is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. Once again, is there anything totally new here? The experience of alcoholics are essentially the same. While they may differ in circumstance, the theme is always the same: a progressive deterioration of the human personality. And the levels of strength and hope these men and women possess vary from day to day in both degree and substance. What then is the constant factor? What is AA's unique difference? Could our answer lie in the manner in which this experience, strength, and hope are shared, and much more important, who is sharing them? Is the secret contained, as most secrets are, in how it all began? And that's on page 10. Long before there was a definition of AA, before there was a book or steps or traditions or a program of recovery, there was a night in Akron only a short 33 years ago. Remember, 33 years before he gave this, no AA. A night when a man named Bill W., alone in a strange city, shaken and frightened, concluded that his only hope of maintaining his present hard-won sobriety was to talk to and try to help another alcoholic. And here's such an important line. So far as I know, that is the first recorded instance where one alcoholic consciously and deliberately turned to another alcoholic not to drink with, but to stay sober with. Such a great line. The first time in the history of the world, one alcoholic turns to another alcoholic not to drink with. In the fateful meeting of Bill W. and Dr. Bob the next evening was an answer finally given to that rhetorical question, which was asked 2,000 years ago. If the blind lead the blind, shall they not fall into the pit? And in 1935 was the answer. Strangely enough, no. But perhaps what occurred that evening was not a contradiction. Perhaps who was a little less blind, one who was at last able to discern vague shapes and forms, described what he saw to one who still lives in total darkness. Much more important than that was what was said that evening. Then what was said that evening was who was saying it. So not what Bill was saying, but the fact that another alcoholic was saying it. I just think this guy had such a good view of alcoholics. He says, Long before the average alcoholic walks through the doors of his first AA meeting, he has sought help from others or been offered to him, in some instances even forced upon him. I mean, think about that. Long before the average alcoholic walks through the doors of his first AA meeting, he has sought help from others or help has been offered to him, in some instances even forced upon him. That's the story of so many people in AA. And then it says this: but these helpers are always superior beings, spouses, parents, employers, priests, ministers, rabbis, swamis, judge, policemen, even bartenders. The moral culpability of the alcoholic and the moral superiority of the helper, even though unstated, are always clearly understood. In other words, for us, before AA, anyone trying to help us was always some kind of morally superior person. And I love this line, and I'm a chronic teenage alcoholic. I love this next line. The overtone of parental disapproval and discipline in these authority figures is always present. I cannot be the only one here who knows what parental disapproval sounds like and looks like. And not only from parents, from a lot of different people. I love that line. The overtone of parental disapproval and discipline. And then it says this: for the first time 33 years ago, an alcoholic suddenly heard a different drummer. Instead of the constant and menacing rat-a-tat-tat of "this is what you should do," he heard an instantly recognizable voice saying, "This is what I did." First time. And then he says this: I am personally convinced that the basic search of every human being from the cradle to the grave is to find at least one other human being before him whom he can stand completely naked, stripped of all pretense or defense, and trust that person not to hurt him, because that other person has stripped himself naked too. This lifelong search can be the end, can begin to end with the first AA encounter. That none of us ever met another human being like us who was in our place but found a way out. I'm going to turn to page 12 at the top, second paragraph. It says, if the alcoholic responds to this invitation, he then encounters what I believe is AA's second unique factor. AA treats the symptom first. It may come as a surprise to some that from a short 30 years ago, when the idea was fairly revolutionary, Alcoholics Anonymous has constantly emphasized its conviction that alcoholism is, to use its own phrase, the symptom of deeper troubles. However, AA also believes that the cleverest diagnosis of these troubles is of little benefit if the patient dies. Autopsies do not benefit the person upon who they are performed. Sometimes sooner, sometimes later, AA seems to be able to get over to its neophytes that total abstinence is the name of the game. In AA, the cart does come before the horse. The first step is still the first step. No newcomer in AA is ever left in any real doubt that recovery can only begin with a decision to stay away from the first drink. That's it. And he soon learns that no one can or will make that decision for him. In fact, he soon further learns that if he makes the decision, no one can or will force him to implement it. In AA, the choice begins and always remains with the alcoholic himself. And while the big book says we've lost our power of choice, the choice he's talking about is the choice to be an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I might have lost the power of choice when it comes to alcohol a long time ago, but I have the power to be an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The desire as well as the ability to make this decision often results, I believe, from what appears to be AA's third unique quality. The intuitive understanding the alcoholic receives while compassionate is not indulgent. That sounds a little bit like tough love to me, but they make it sound so much better. The intuitive understanding the alcoholic receives while compassionate is not indulgent. The therapists in AA already have their doctorates in 4 fields where the alcoholic reigns supreme. I love this line. It's probably one of the greatest sentences in all of AA history. The therapists in AA already have their doctorate in the 4 fields where the alcoholic reigns supreme: phoniness, self-deception, evasion, and self-pity. I mean, incredible. This guy's presentation, absolutely incredible. He is not asked what he is thinking. He is told what he is thinking. No one waits to trap him in a lie. He is told what lies he is getting ready to tell. In the end, he begins to achieve honesty by default. In the end, there's not much point in trying to fool people who may have invented the game you're playing. I love that. One of the greatest lines about sponsorship ever written. There's not much point in trying to fool people who may have invented the game you're playing. In regular language that you can't use at a podium or recording, it's sometimes you'll hear, you can't blank a blank, right? That's the saying we hear. And then it goes on to say on page 13, there is yet a 4th factor in AA, which I feel can be found nowhere else. And that is the recovered alcoholic's omnipresent, bottomless, enthusiastic willingness to talk about alcoholism. It's in and its outs, its whys and its wherefores, its becauses and its begats. Without the newcomer ever being fully aware of it, his fascination with alcohol, his thirst, his desire, yeah, even his need for a drink, is literally talked to death. It has always seemed exquisitely fitting to me that people who once used their mouths to get sick now use them to get well. Amazing. Finally, there is a reversal of form which AA's educational process takes. The newcomer to AA is asked not so much to learn new values as to unlearn those he comes in with, not so much to adopt new goals as to abandon old ones. Amazing. There's a story in the current 4th edition of the Big Book. I'm forgetting the name now. It's a young woman who got sober, but I love her one line because I got sober young at a young age. And she writes, most people change their drinking to meet their goals. She changed her goals to meet her drinking. That's my story. Drinking comes first, always. Number 1, no matter what. Now, sometimes this pamphlet, people say, oh, it's too dogmatic. And it's really not. But this one paragraph I'm going to read is probably why it gets the bad rap. And I think because, there's a lot of us in AA who are in and out for a long time. Or there's a lot of us who are in and just decided to be miserable instead of becoming full-fledged members of AA. We have those people too, right? And this is it, the paragraph on page 14. There is a widely held belief in AA that if a newcomer simply continues to attend meetings, something will finally rub off on you. And the implication, of course, is that something which rubs off on will be this so-called miracle of AA. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that many people in AA accept this statement quite literally. I have observed them over the years. They faithfully attend meetings, faithfully waiting for something to rub off. The funny part about it is that something is rubbing off on them is death. They sit there week after month after year while mental, spiritual, and physical rigor mortis slowly sets in. I think that's why some people say this pamphlet is too strict. But all it's doing is calling out what most of us have done. We want the barest of AA possible. Or we make the worst mistake. We rate our bottom on like a chart in our own mind. I'm really not the bottom of the bottom. Like my bottom was kind of like here. And then we think that where your bottom is has something to do with how much of the AA program you need to do. And this is why the first 50 pages of the big book don't talk about bottoms. They talk about the allergy and the obsession. We don't care about were you homeless? Were you locked up? Were you thrown out of your house? Did you lose your... We don't care about any of that. We care about, are you a real alcoholic? And if you are, this is what you need to do. He says, I believe the real miracle of AA, the something that will rub off, we hope, is simply the alcoholic's willingness to act. Why he finally becomes willing, I hope to touch on later. Right now, let's turn our attention to what he becomes willing to do. AA has been happily called a program of action. In fact, one of our most quoted aphorisms is action is the magic word. When the newcomer hears this, he invariably gets a mental picture of his attending meetings, making what are known as 12-step calls on other alcoholics, speaking at meetings, joining committees, in general, a kind of constant rushing to and from. Let's see whether this is what it really is. Quoting again from chapter 5 of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. And on the top of page 14, it lists all the steps. And at the page bottom of 15, it says this. First, does it come as a surprise to you, as it did to me, that there is nothing physical in this program? No leafy green vegetables, no vitamins, no daily calisthenics. I think this is because from the very beginning, the alcoholic in AA has believed that the physical aspects of our disease would have little import if they were not accompanied by an equally progressive spiritual deterioration. If the major thing we had to worry about was the physical allergy to alcohol, I love this line, then I believe AA would have never happened because it would have not been needed. Listen to that. If the major thing we had to worry about was a physical allergy to alcohol, then I believe AA would have never happened because it would have never needed to. At various times, I have been strongly allergic to various foods, to strawberries, but I've never had to join Strawberries Anonymous. I didn't have to change to pork, but I didn't have to change my religion to abstain from it. If then alcoholism is largely a spiritual disease requiring a spiritual healing, does it come as a surprise to you, as it did me, that there is nothing new in a spiritual sense, nothing startlingly different or unique in this program? Most of the ideas have been around since man crawled out of the cave. Many of them existed even in primitive societies, and every alcoholic, no matter how irreligious or unethical he may have succeeded in keeping himself, at some point in time must have used some or all of them as a set of values by which to measure himself. To believe that the alcoholic who approaches AA is an unprincipled, untaught barbarian, suddenly transformed by the previously unavailable spiritual illumination of the 12 steps, is to me utterly foolishness. Once again, we are confronted with the aspect of AA's therapy which has a total new impact without apparently any accompanying newness of substance. And it says, I believe it lies in the way the steps are presented rather than what they contain. They are reports of action taken rather than rules not to be broken or the under pain of drunkenness. Past tense, we talk about what they've done for us to new people. And then, on page 17, it says, Whether by accident or design or supernatural guidance, the 12 steps are so framed and presented that the alcoholic can either ignore them completely, take them cafeteria style, or embrace them wholeheartedly. In any case, he can report only on what he has done. Till he does, he knows that he is more of a guest of AA than a member. And this is a situation that is finally intolerable to the alcoholic. He must take at least some of the steps or go away. In my opinion, this is the answer to what finally rubs off on the waiting, inactive, often hostile AA member, and also the answer as to why it happens. This guy writes so well. But, people talk about that. Are you a visitor, an attendee, or a member? Because there is a middle category of attendee away from visitor. But have you really joined? I mean, that's a question for everybody to answer themselves. The presentation of the 12 steps as reports of action taken rather than as commandments to be followed are also forms the basis of AA's conspicuous absence of any formalized body of dogma or doctrine. Amazing. We talk about what we did, not what they need to do. On page 18, it says the founders of AA, it is obvious, felt that alcoholics needed the help of a power greater than themselves. But again, whether by accident, design, or divine guidance, they have wisely refrained from strictly defining this power. While AA literature has used and continues to use the personal pronoun, which describes the concept of a personal deity, a belief in this concept is by no means required. In fact, I am convinced that the greater a member's years in AA, the less important the nature of his power becomes. Just that you have one. I and most of the members I know seem to progress over the years from a search for a God we can understand to a belief in God who understands us. Founders of AA also hasten to clarify their original use of the term spiritual experience and spiritual awakening to describe the personality change they believe to be indispensable to permanent recovery. There it is. Someone asked me one time, because I say those words all the time, permanent recovery is not in any AA literature. It is. It's in a member's eye view. It's right here. Indispensable to permanent recovery. In the appendix to the book Alcoholics Anonymous, we find these words. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, i.e., sudden, spectacular upheavals of a religious nature, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. He, the newcomer, finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about him alone. In the 12 traditions, AA claims but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. And then he says this, however, I would remind you that these groups are made up of alcoholics, and by the time it can be determined what the collective conscience has decided, even the most militant atheist or persistent agnostic can have stayed sober for years. At the bottom of page 19, it says this, here it would appear is an organization that on one hand claims there is no moral culpability involved in the disease of alcoholism, and on the other suggests to its members that recovery entails a searching and fearless accountability of his culpability to God and to other human beings. I personally feel this apparent paradox results from the empirical knowledge gained by the founders of AA. I believe they found, as we all have, that no matter what you tell the newcomer about the disease of alcoholism, he still feels guilty. He cannot blind himself to the moral consequences of his drinking, the blight he has visited upon those around him, and the shame and degradation is he inflicted upon himself. This load of conventional guilt, and I use the word conventional advisingly, as well as the alcoholic's stubborn and pervasive wish to cling to it, is the oldest of his old ideas. It is the oldest because it started first, and in most cases, it will be the last to go. But go it must if the alcoholic's attitude towards himself and hence the world around him is to undergo any basic change. That's why I believe the founders of AA learned in their own experimentation that the alcoholic must be given a conventional means of unloading this burden of conventional guilt. Hence the fourth and the fifth step. It goes on in the bottom of page 20 to say an often quoted sentence from the book Alcoholics Anonymous is self-centeredness is the root of our troubles. And one of the earliest evidences of the basic change in the personality of the recovering alcoholic is the slow, hesitant, frightened, but persistent offering of himself to others. Alcoholics are numbered among the great gimmies of the world. I love that he says that. Give me a break, give me a chance, give me time, give me understanding, give me love. In AAs, these same gimmies come to be numbered among the great givers, and lo, some of them often learn to want nothing in return. The house that AA helps a man build for himself is different for each occupant. What a beautiful line. Because each occupant is his own architect. We're not the Stepford Wife Club. We're not the Kool-Aid drinking club. AA helps a man build for himself is different, the house different for each occupant, because each occupant is the architect. For many, AA is kind of going home, a return, like the prodigal son's house to the faith of his fathers. To others, it is a never-ending journey into lands they did not even dream existed. It does not matter which group you fall into. What is really important is that AA has more than demonstrated that the house it builds can accommodate the rebel as well as the conformist, the radical as well as the conservative, the agnostic as well as the believer. The absence of formalized dogma, the lack of rules and commandments, the non-specific nature of its definitions, and the flexibility of its framework, all the things we have thus far considered contribute to this incredibly and happy end. He goes on to say this: the formless flexibility of AA's principles as interpreted by their different adherents finally pushes our alcoholic into a stance where he must only himself as a frame of reference for his actions. And this in turn means he must be willing to accept the consequences of those actions. In my book, that is the definition of emotional sobriety. I love that. You're responsible for your own actions. There's something I want to read before I stop. Hold on. At the bottom of page 24, AA will probably always number among its ranks those who, in their fear and in their anger, would make of AA a kind of spiritual ghetto, a sort of co-ed monastery where alcoholics hide and lick their wounds, coining childish and defensive words like normsy and alky, and pointing accusing fingers at all the tigers out there. There must come a day, it seems to me, when every alcoholic in or out of AA finally sits down in the presence of his enemies. When he does, he will be amazed to discover that he is attending a meeting of one, himself. I heard a lady at Midnight Madness in New York City say a long time ago, I don't know if she ever read this pamphlet, but during her talk, she said, "The enemy brushed my teeth this morning. The enemy brushes my teeth every morning. I start the day off with the enemy." And I mean, that line, when he does, he will be amazed to discover that he is attending a meeting of one, himself. It occurred to me then that this is what AA had been for me, and I hoped would always be for others. A ridiculously simple, jerry-built, noisy, clanky, but sturdy, fiercely loved, and joyous kind of vehicle that has asked me and all its other passengers to turn it, and ourselves around so that all of us could head back up the hill we came down, back up where we could once again see the bridge to normal living. Tonight, if I could find one fault with AA, it would be that we have not yet begun to tap the potential hidden in the last 7 words of the 12 step. Practice these principles in all our affairs. I love this, maybe one of my favorite paragraphs in all of AA literature, top of page 26. I'm sitting in an AA meeting. I am never aware that I am sitting next to another white man, another Catholic, another American, or a Frenchman, Mexican, Jew, Muslim, or Hindu, black man, or brown. I am aware only that I am sitting next to another alcoholic. And it seemed deeply significant to me this feeling of common humanity had been purchased by me at the cost of considerable pain and suffering. Should this hard-won understanding of and feeling for others be confined to the meeting halls of members of AA? Or does it remain for me to take what I have learned and what I have experienced, not only in AA, but in every other area and endeavor of my life, to lift up my head and to assume my rightful place in my family? Can I there, in the household of God, know that I am not sitting next to another white man, another Catholic, another American, nor yet a Frenchman, Mexican, Jew, Muslim, Hindu, black, or brown man, nor even another alcoholic. And I can finally, at long last, please God, come home from all the wars and say in the depths of my soul, I'm sitting next to another human being. Some of the greatest writing in all of AA is those 2 paragraphs. And the end, which he talks constantly about no dogma, no doctrine. He compares it at the end to people going to church, but he's talking about AA, not people going to church. And he says this coming Sunday in the churches for many of our members, there will be read the portion of the Gospel of Matthew, which recounts the time when John the Baptist was languishing in the prison of Herod, and hearing of the works of his cousin Jesus, he sent 2 disciples to say to him, Art thou he who is to come, or shall we look for another? And Christ did as he so often did. He did not answer them directly, but he wanted John to decide for himself. And so he said to the disciples, Go and report to John what you have heard and what you have seen. He uses that as an example of what Christians talk about. He does not say everyone should believe in that. And he says, Go to report to John what you have heard and what you've seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead rise, the poor have the gospel preached to them. And then he says this, but back in my childhood catechism days, I was taught that the poor in this instance did not mean only the poor in material sense, but also meant the poor in spirit, those who have burned with an inner hunger and an inner thirst, and that the word gospel meant quite literally the good news. And ends with this. More than 16 years ago, 4 men, my boss, my physician, my pastor, and the one friend I had left, working singingly and together, maneuvered me into AA. Tonight, if they were to ask me, tell us what did you find, I would say to them what I say to you now. I can tell you only what I have heard and seen. It seems the blind do see, the lame do walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead rise, and over again, in the middle of the longest day or the darkest night, the poor in spirit have the good news told to them. God grant that it may always be so. So, that is without a doubt one of my favorite pamphlets. It's taken out of context so many times because, like I've said before, It's easy to take a line from any piece of literature or a Bill W. letter or anything and use it to your own advantage. I could pick out so many lines in this and say, oh, that's way too rigid. It's too Christian. I could say a million things. But if I read the whole pamphlet, he uses those examples to say of what we are not. And he really talks about the alcoholic. And I love the parental supervision. Wow, hold on one second. I want to tell somebody somebody from Australia just sent me a message about a person that needs help. I just want to haven't talked to this person since I met him outside smoking a cigar outside some meeting in Australia. But to that person, I just put my email and my WhatsApp. And they reminded me who they were when I met them by asking the question. And I'll remind all the people in the United States and Canada how spoiled and lucky we are with AA. Anyone who knows me for a long time, I wore a band on my hand. I still have a band, but I had a different one. And it said, be the least disturbed person in the room, Sandy B. And I was outside this meeting. This person wrote to me and they said, hi, Billy, my name is, I'm not going to say it. And they said, I met you in Adelaide last year. You gave me your Sandy B bracelet outside the hotel. I did. Like, I realized how spoiled we are in AA. He's like, God, you never met Sandy B, did you? I said, yeah, I met him quite a few times and heard him speak because he had noticed my bracelet. And I said, well, I said, you can clean this. I said, but you should have this more than me. Like, I got to see Sandy over and over again. So to that person who has a situation where people need help or somebody needs help, please send me a WhatsApp or an email. Why do I think some wanted to retire this pamphlet? I think maybe because it's written for professionals and it doesn't tell professionals we have any kind of scientific or special medical process. We have a way to get in touch with the higher power through the power of the 12 steps. And maybe that doesn't fit into 2025. The General Service Conference did not retire this pamphlet. That was the last question. So next week, I am guessing we must be on concept 7, I'm guessing, but I am going to confirm just to make sure that I am not making that up. Let's see. 5, tradition 7 and concept 7. Please, I put it in the private Facebook group. I know everybody's so humble. I get it. But if you happen to be moderating a meeting or chairing a meeting or speaking at a meeting at the International Convention, send me a message so I can put it in the WhatsApp group. Not because we're going to worship you, not because, not about any of that. It's because some people here might want to meet some other people here. And we would let people know. So that's it. Just send me that message. Would there be any benefit to have this printed as a story in the back of the book in the new edition? Maybe. That sounds like something you should change to your group in your district and maybe send in an agenda item for next year. 5th edition isn't going to be printed for a while. Probably not this year, probably not next year, probably at least 2 years out. So maybe. So that's it, everyone. Please, concept 7 is complicated. Legal versus the spiritual. Please read it ahead of time. And we'll talk about tradition 7, and I will close with the responsibility statement. Oh, you know what? I'm going to answer this one question. Sorry. Quick question. The new preamble, you mentioned this before. Since this updated AA writing, do meetings have to use it or can they say they are autonomous? You said it before and I cannot remember. Obviously, when this guy gave his presentation, the old version of the preamble existed. I will give you my thoughts on the preamble. They're my thoughts. Throw them out if you want, but I can't be arrogant. I'm arrogant enough. So I don't want to be more arrogant to think that I can make my own group consciences. The General Service Conference of Alcoholics Anonymous changed the preamble. I wouldn't want somebody in my group to change the big book, or as Bill sees it, or the 12 and 12 when they were reading it. I would just like them to read what's in the book when we're on that book. If I expect them to do that, how could I justify that I get to change the preamble? That we have one tradition, unity. We have 11 others to keep that unity. And I know some people don't like the decision or how it was made or anything else. But I really mean that. Like, if you ask somebody to read how it works in your group and they change the words, but you are a group who changes the preamble, then why can't they change that? Why do you get to change something and other people don't get to change it? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. But what do I know? That's it. After a moment of silence, the responsibility statement. I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Have a good night, everyone.